The December wind cut through Elena Martinez's wool coat as she stood on the familiar brick walkway of her childhood home, clutching a still warm apple cinnamon pie against her chest. Through the golden glow of the dining room window, she could see them all gathered around the mahogany table her father had built 30 years ago. The same table where she'd served countless family meals, celebrated every birthday, and created memories that now felt like they belonged to someone else. Her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as she watched her brother Richard carve what looked like a perfect honey-glazed ham. Jessica, his wife, was pouring wine into crystal glasses Elena remembered polishing every holiday season. Her own son Marcus sat in the chair where Elena used to sit, laughing at something his Uncle Richard had said. Even her daughter Sophia was there, animated and glowing as she helped serve vegetables from Elena's grandmother's china, the same china Elena had carefully washed and stored after every family gathering. The scene looked like a Norman Rockwell painting of the perfect Christmas Eve dinner. Warm, complete, joyful. Except Elena was standing outside in the cold, watching through glass like a stranger peering into someone else's life. She shifted the pie to one arm and knocked on the heavy wooden door. 3 gentle raps that echoed in the quiet evening air. The sound of laughter inside paused momentarily. Footsteps approached. The porch light flickered on, casting harsh shadows across her face. The door swung open, and Richard appeared in the doorway wearing the red sweater Elena had given him last Christmas. His face went from mild curiosity to complete shock in the span of a heartbeat. His mouth actually fell open, as if he'd seen a ghost. "Elena?" His voice cracked slightly on her name. Behind him, the conversation had stopped entirely. She could feel the weight of their stares, the sudden silence that felt heavier than the December snow beginning to fall around her shoulders. "Hi, Richard," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady despite the way her heart was hammering against her ribs. "I brought Mom's favorite pie, the one with the lattice crust she always requests." Richard just stared at her, not moving from the doorway, not inviting her in, not reaching for the pie. The warm air from inside the house rushed past him, carrying the scent of rosemary and garlic, the sounds of clinking silverware, the echo of her mother's voice asking someone to pass the cranberry sauce. "Elena," Richard repeated, and this time his voice was different, harder, almost annoyed. "Why did you come?" The words hit her like a physical blow. She blinked, certain she'd misheard him. "What do you mean, why did I come? It's Christmas Eve. It's our family dinner." Richard glanced over his shoulder toward the dining room, then back at her. His expression wasn't angry exactly, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was the look you'd give an unexpected door-to-door salesman who'd interrupted your evening. "We told you Christmas was family only this year, Elena." Family only. The phrase hung between them like icicles ready to fall and shatter. Elena felt something cold spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the winter weather. Behind Richard, she caught a glimpse of Marcus, her own son, deliberately looking down at his plate, refusing to meet her eyes through the doorway. "But I am family," she whispered, though the words felt strange in her mouth, like speaking a language she was suddenly forgetting how to use. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Before that devastating Christmas Eve, Elena Martinez had been the invisible thread holding her family's entire tapestry together. For 34 years, she had been the one everyone turned to, the reliable constant in a world that seemed to shift around her while she remained steadfast and giving. It all began when she was 18 and her father Miguel suffered his first heart attack. While Richard focused on learning the construction business, Elena naturally stepped into the role of family caretaker. She delayed college to help her mother Gloria manage the household and care for her father during his recovery. Just for a semester, she'd told herself then. But somehow, one semester became a year, then 2, and before she knew it, she was 25 with a teaching degree earned through night classes and weekend programs. Elena had always been the family's emotional compass. When Richard and Jessica went through their rough patch 15 years ago, Elena babysat their kids every weekend so they could attend marriage counseling. When Marcus struggled with math in middle school, Elena spent hours at the kitchen table helping him with homework while Jessica worked late showings and Richard traveled for business. When Sophia went through her rebellious teenage phase, it was Elena who talked her through heartbreaks and friend drama at 2 in the morning. After their father died 5 years ago, the family's dependence on Elena became even more pronounced. Gloria, devastated by the loss of her husband of 45 years, couldn't bear to stay alone in the house filled with memories. Richard suggested she move in with Elena temporarily, just until Mom adjusts. Elena had welcomed her mother with open arms, converting her small apartment's living room into a bedroom and rearranging her entire life around Gloria's needs. Every morning, Elena would wake at 5:30 to prepare Gloria's medications and make her favorite breakfast: 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast with just a whisper of butter, and coffee with exactly 1 teaspoon of sugar. She'd help her mother dress, braid her still thick silver hair, and drive her to senior center activities before heading to her teaching job at Roosevelt Elementary. Evenings belonged to the family ritual Elena had created and maintained for decades. She'd pick up Gloria, stop at the grocery store to gather ingredients for dinner, and head to the family house where Richard and Jessica now lived. Elena would cook elaborate meals while Gloria sat at the kitchen island, sharing stories about her day and helping with simple tasks like folding napkins or arranging flowers. "Elena makes the best meatloaf," Richard would announce every time she prepared his favorite dish, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. "I don't know how you get it so perfect every time." "It's Mom's recipe," Elena would always reply, deflecting the praise while her heart swelled with warmth. Jessica would often grab Elena's hand after dinner and say, "I honestly don't know how you do it all. Working full-time, taking care of Mom, cooking for all of us. You're like a superhero." Elena would laugh and brush off the compliment, but internally, she treasured those moments of recognition. The holidays were Elena's masterpiece. She spent weeks planning menus, shopping for the perfect gifts within her modest teacher's budget, and decorating the house with the same ornaments they'd used since the children were small. Christmas morning always began at 6 a.m. with Elena preparing cinnamon rolls and coffee, ensuring everyone had their traditional breakfast before the gift exchange. "What would we do without you, Elena?" her mother would say, reaching over to pat her daughter's hand as Elena served slice after slice of homemade apple pie. "You're our angel." Those words were Elena's fuel, her validation, her entire sense of purpose wrapped up in being indispensable to the people she loved most. Retria. The first crack in Elena's carefully constructed world appeared on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday evening in June, 6 months before that devastating Christmas Eve. Marcus was turning 28, and Elena had spent the entire previous day preparing his birthday celebration with the same meticulous care she'd given every family milestone for decades. She'd taken a personal day from teaching to focus entirely on making the dinner perfect. Marcus had always been particular about his birthday cake. He wanted the same chocolate fudge recipe Elena's grandmother had made, with cream cheese frosting and exactly 14 candles arranged in the shape of his initials. Elena had driven to 3 different stores to find the right cocoa powder, the kind that gave the cake its distinctively rich taste that store-bought versions could never replicate. The cake had taken her 4 hours to make properly. She'd creamed butter and sugar by hand, folded in ingredients with the patience of someone who understood that love could be measured in the time spent on details others might overlook. The frosting was spread in perfect swirls, each candle positioned with mathematical precision. When she stepped back to admire her work, Elena felt that familiar surge of satisfaction, the quiet pride of knowing she'd created something beautiful for someone she loved. By 5 o'clock, Elena had transformed the dining room into a celebration space. She'd ironed the good tablecloth, arranged fresh flowers from her small garden, and set the table with her mother's wedding china. The smell of Marcus's favorite meal, her special braised short ribs with garlic mashed potatoes, filled the house with warmth and anticipation. Marcus arrived first, giving Elena the kind of enthusiastic hug that reminded her of the little boy who used to help her stir cookie dough. "Something smells incredible in here, Mom. Is that the short ribs?" "Of course it is, sweetheart. Your birthday dinner," Elena replied, wiping her hands on her apron and beaming at her son. Richard and Jessica arrived 20 minutes later, and Elena noticed Jessica carrying a large white bakery box. At first, Elena assumed it contained something else, perhaps dinner rolls or a side dish Jessica had picked up to contribute to the meal. The dinner proceeded beautifully. Everyone praised Elena's cooking, and Gloria regaled them with stories about Marcus as a toddler. Elena felt that familiar warmth spreading through her chest, the deep satisfaction of seeing her family happy and gathered around food she'd prepared with love. Then came time for dessert. Elena disappeared into the kitchen and returned carrying her masterpiece, the chocolate cake glowing with 28 flickering candles. She'd even remembered to dim the dining room lights for dramatic effect, just like she had when Marcus was 7 years old. "Happy birthday to you," she began singing, her voice full of joy and anticipation. But Jessica was already opening the bakery box. "Oh, Elena," Jessica said with a light laugh that somehow managed to sound both amused and dismissive. "I already ordered a cake from Delacroix Patisserie downtown. You know that fancy French place? I thought it would be a nice treat." Elena stopped singing mid-note. The candles continued flickering on her homemade cake as Jessica lifted an elaborate creation from the box. Layers of glossy chocolate ganache decorated with perfect rosettes and gold leaf accents. It looked like something from a magazine spread, professionally crafted and undeniably impressive. "Yours looks so homemade," Jessica continued, and the way she said homemade made it sound like a flaw rather than a feature. "But this one cost $85. The reviews said it's absolutely divine." Everyone's attention shifted immediately to Jessica's store-bought cake. Richard whistled appreciatively. $85, that's some serious cake." "Thanks for trying, Mom," Marcus said, glancing briefly at Elena's creation before focusing on the bakery cake. "But wow, this one looks really professional." Elena stood there holding her grandmother's recipe, watching her family cut into someone else's creation, while her own cake, made with 4 hours of love and 30 years of birthday tradition, sat abandoned with its slowly melting candles. Retry. The cake incident should have been an isolated disappointment, a single moment of thoughtlessness that Elena could forgive and forget. Instead, it became the first domino in a slow-motion collapse that would reshape her understanding of her place in the family she'd devoted her life to serving. 2 weeks after Marcus's birthday, Richard announced over Sunday dinner that he was planning a business dinner with potential investors. Elena began mentally preparing the menu, calculating how many people she'd need to cook for, when Richard held up his hand with an awkward smile. "Actually, Elena, this one's going to be at that new steakhouse downtown. You know, impress the clients with the fancy atmosphere." He paused, not quite meeting her eyes. "It's more of a professional thing." Elena nodded, trying to hide her confusion. For 15 years, important business discussions had happened around her dining room table, over meals she'd carefully planned to make their guests feel welcomed and valued. Richard had always said her cooking was better than any restaurant, that the personal touch gave him an advantage over competitors who took clients to impersonal establishments. But when Marcus casually mentioned the dinner the following week, Elena realized it hadn't been a business meeting at all. Jessica's sister and her husband had been there, along with Gloria and several family friends. They'd celebrated the Patterson family's anniversary, people Elena had known for decades, whose children she'd tutored and comforted through various crises over the years. Nobody had thought to invite her. The exclusions began multiplying with surgical precision. Jessica started making decisions about Gloria's medical care without consulting Elena, despite the fact that Elena had been handling her mother's appointments and medications for 5 years. When Elena asked about a specialist referral she'd researched, Jessica waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I already handled that. Dr. Morrison thinks the cardiologist I chose is much better than the one you found. More experience with elderly patients." Elena had spent hours researching that first doctor, reading patient reviews and checking credentials. But Jessica's choice was presented as final, unchallengeable, superior. Elena found herself nodding along, swallowing words that felt increasingly pointless to speak. The shifts were subtle, but relentless. Marcus, who had called Elena every few days for years, began responding to her messages with brief texts hours later. But she noticed he answered Richard's calls immediately, often while standing right next to her. When Elena mentioned a new teaching method she was excited about, the conversation would quickly shift to Richard's latest business acquisition or Jessica's newest interior design project. Family traditions that Elena had created and maintained for decades were quietly reassigned. When Elena suggested making her grandmother's tamales for Labor Day weekend, a tradition spanning 23 years, Jessica brightened with an alternative idea. "Actually, I found this amazing catering company that does authentic Mexican food. Let's try something new this year. It'll be fun to taste someone else's cooking for once." "But the tamales are a family tradition," Elena said softly. "Marcus always looks forward to helping me make them." "Oh, sweetheart." Jessica's voice carried that particular tone people use when addressing someone who doesn't quite understand how the world works. "Traditions can evolve. Besides, wouldn't it be nice for you to just relax and enjoy the party instead of working all day in the kitchen?" Elena wanted to explain that making tamales wasn't work for her. It was connection, heritage, love expressed through her hands and passed down through generations. But Jessica had already moved on to discussing party decorations, and Elena realized her explanation wasn't wanted or needed. She began noticing her own behavior changing in response to these small rejections. She started asking permission for things that had never required approval before. "Would it be okay if I brought dessert to dinner on Sunday?" she'd ask, instead of simply announcing what she planned to make. She found herself apologizing for preferences, opinions, and suggestions that were met with polite indifference or gentle correction. The woman who had once confidently orchestrated every family gathering was slowly learning to seek approval for her own presence in spaces she had created. Gloria Martinez's 78th birthday party became the stage for Elena's most devastating humiliation, though it would take her weeks to fully comprehend the calculated cruelty of what had transpired that warm October evening. Elena had begun planning her mother's birthday celebration in September, just as she had every year for the past 3 decades. She'd reserved the community center where the family had celebrated every major milestone, the same room where Gloria and Miguel had renewed their vows on their 40th anniversary. Elena spent hours creating a guest list, carefully including Gloria's Bridge Club friends, neighbors from the old neighborhood, and extended family members who lived across the city. The theme was "A Life Well Lived," and Elena had spent weeks crafting a tribute that honored her mother's journey. She'd digitized old family photographs, creating a timeline that stretched from Gloria's childhood in El Salvador to her recent volunteer work at the church food bank. Each photo was carefully selected and arranged in a handmade album that Elena planned to present as the centerpiece gift. She'd also coordinated with Gloria's favorite restaurant to cater her preferred dishes, the same pupusas and tamales that reminded her mother of her grandmother's cooking. Elena had tasted every item during the planning process, ensuring the flavors would transport Gloria back to the happiest memories of her childhood. On the morning of the party, Elena arrived at the community center 2 hours early to set up decorations. She was hanging streamers in Gloria's favorite colors, deep purple and gold, when Richard's truck pulled into the parking lot. But instead of helping her set up, Richard looked genuinely confused. "Elena, what are you doing here so early?" "Setting up for Mom's party," she replied, balancing on a chair to reach the high corners of the room. "Could you help me with these banners? They're heavier than I expected." Richard's face went through a series of expressions Elena couldn't quite read. "Elena, didn't Jessica call you? We moved the party to our house yesterday. The community center felt too impersonal for Mom's milestone birthday." Elena's hands froze on the streamer she was hanging. "Move the party?" Jessica thought Mom would be more comfortable in a familiar setting. More intimate. She's been planning something really special. Elena climbed down from the chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. But I've already paid for the room. The catering is being delivered here in 3 hours. The flowers, the decorations. Oh. Richard looked genuinely sorry, but not sorry enough to acknowledge the magnitude of what had happened. Jessica said she tried calling you yesterday, but you must have been at school. She didn't want to bother you at work. Elena checked her phone. No missed calls, no voicemails, no text messages. When they arrived at Richard's house an hour later, Elena discovered that Jessica hadn't simply moved the party. She had reimagined it entirely. The backyard was transformed with elegant white tents, professional floral arrangements, and a catering setup that looked like something from a magazine spread. A string quartet played softly near the garden, and uniformed servers moved gracefully between clusters of guests who were already deep in conversation. Elena recognized the guests, but the entire atmosphere was different from anything she would have created. This wasn't a celebration of Gloria's simple, hard-working life. It was a sophisticated garden party that seemed designed to impress rather than commemorate. Elena! Jessica appeared in a flowing dress that perfectly matched the party's color scheme, looking radiant and accomplished. There you are. We decided to surprise you too. Isn't this wonderful? Elena watched as guests approached Jessica throughout the evening, complimenting her amazing event planning and thoughtful attention to detail. The string quartet had been Jessica's idea. The professional photographer capturing every moment was Jessica's hire. Even the menu, sophisticated Mediterranean dishes that bore no resemblance to Gloria's cultural preferences, reflected Jessica's refined taste rather than Gloria's actual desires. When it came time for gifts, Elena watched her mother open Jessica and Richard's present first, an expensive jewelry box with Gloria's initials engraved in gold script. Gloria gasped with delight, holding it up for everyone to admire, while the photographer captured her joy. Elena's handmade photo album, which had taken weeks to compile and cost her an entire paycheck to print professionally, received a distracted, "How thoughtful, dear," before being set aside without a second glance. But the moment that would replay in Elena's mind for months came near the end of the evening. She was helping clear plates when she overheard Jessica talking to Mrs. Patterson, their longtime neighbor, near the dessert table. "Poor Elena tries so hard," Jessica said, her voice carrying that particular mixture of affection and pity that people use when discussing someone they find endearingly incompetent. "She just doesn't understand what people actually want these days. Can you imagine having this party at that dreary community center with takeout food?" Mrs. Patterson nodded sympathetically, glancing toward Elena with the kind of look usually reserved for well-meaning relatives who give inappropriate gifts. "You're so sweet to include her in the planning. It must be difficult when she has such different ideas about entertaining." Elena stood frozen behind a decorative pillar, holding a stack of plates, listening to two women discuss her as if she were a child whose feelings needed to be managed, rather than an adult whose contributions had value. The final severance came 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, delivered through a phone call that would replay in Elena's mind like a recurring nightmare. She was grading her third-grade students' math worksheets at her small kitchen table when her phone rang, Richard's name appearing on the screen with the cheerful familiarity that had once brought her comfort. "Hey, Elena." Richard's voice carried that particular tone people use when they're about to deliver news they know will be unwelcome. "I wanted to talk to you about Thanksgiving plans." Elena set down her red pen, already feeling a knot forming in her stomach. For 32 years, Thanksgiving had been her domain. She'd inherited the responsibility from her mother when Gloria's arthritis made the extensive cooking too difficult, and Elena had embraced it with the same devotion she brought to everything involving her family. "Of course," she said, reaching for the notebook where she'd already begun planning the menu. "I was thinking we could try that new stuffing recipe I found, the one with cranberries and pecans. And Marcus mentioned he'd love to have sweet potato casserole again this year." "Actually, Elena," Richard interrupted gently, "that's what I wanted to discuss. Jessica wants to host this year, at our house." Elena blinked, certain she'd misunderstood. "Host? But I always cook Thanksgiving dinner. It's already planned. I've had the turkey on order since September. I know, and you do such a wonderful job, Richard said, his voice taking on that patronizing quality she'd been hearing more frequently. But Jessica's been feeling left out of the family traditions. She thinks it would be meaningful for her to take over some of the holiday responsibilities. Left out? Elena's voice came out smaller than she intended. But she's always been part of Thanksgiving. She helps with serving. She brings wine. She wants to cook this year, Elena, the whole meal. She's been planning it for weeks, researching recipes, talking to caterers for advice. She's really excited about it. Elena felt something cold spreading through her chest. Caterers? Well, not exactly caterers, but she's ordered some dishes from that gourmet place downtown, and she's making others herself. She wants it to be really special this year, especially with Mom getting older. You know how important it is for Jessica to feel like she's contributing to the family? The irony of that statement hit Elena like a physical blow. Jessica needed to feel like she was contributing to the family, while Elena, who had been contributing everything for decades, was being quietly pushed aside to make room for someone else's sense of purpose. "Where would you like me to help?" Elena asked, grasping for some role in the tradition she'd created and maintained through economic downturns, family crises, and personal exhaustion. There was a pause that lasted just long enough to communicate everything Richard couldn't say directly. Actually, Elena, Jessica thought it might be less stressful for everyone if she handled all the cooking herself. You know how she is about her kitchen organization. She's got this whole system planned out. Elena understood with crystalline clarity what Richard wasn't saying. Her help wasn't wanted. Her expertise wasn't valued. Her presence in the kitchen, the space where she'd orchestrated countless family celebrations, would be an inconvenience to Jessica's vision of the perfect Thanksgiving. "So, I'm just coming as a guest?" The words felt foreign in her mouth, like speaking a language she'd never learned. Exactly! Isn't that nice? You can finally relax and enjoy the holiday instead of working all day. Jessica's really excited to show you what she can do. Elena stared at her planning notebook, filled with menu ideas, grocery lists, and timing schedules she'd been refining for weeks. 32 years of Thanksgiving memories, the disasters she'd salvaged, the dietary restrictions she'd accommodated, the family recipes she'd perfected through trial and error, reduced to an obligation Jessica was excited to take over. "What time should I be there?" Elena asked, her voice carefully neutral. Jessica said around 2 o'clock. Dinner will be at 3:30. 2 o'clock. Elena had always started cooking at 5 in the morning, spending 9 hours creating a meal that brought her family together. Now she was being invited to arrive 1.5 hours before a dinner someone else would claim credit for creating. That night, Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation, and recognizing it for what it truly was. Not an invitation to relax, but a dismissal from the role that had defined her place in the family for 3 decades. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Elena made a decision that surprised even herself. She called Richard back. "I'm not feeling well," she said, the lie sliding out more easily than she'd expected. "I think I'm coming down with something. I don't want to risk getting everyone sick, especially Mom." "Oh no," Richard said. But Elena detected relief rather than concern in his voice. "Should we postpone?" "Don't be silly. Jessica's worked so hard on her dinner. I'll just stay home and rest. Tell everyone I'm sorry to miss it." Elena hung up the phone and waited. She waited for Richard to call back and insist she come anyway. She waited for Marcus to text asking if she needed anything. She waited for someone, anyone, to suggest that Thanksgiving wouldn't be the same without her. Nobody called. Thanksgiving Day arrived gray and drizzling, matching the emptiness that had settled into Elena's bones like a chronic ache. She woke at 5:30 in the morning out of pure habit, her body's internal clock still programmed for the ritual of preparing a feast that would never happen. The silence in her small apartment felt oppressive, broken only by the steady rhythm of rain against her kitchen window. Elena sat at her tiny table in her pajamas, eating a peanut butter sandwich that tasted like cardboard, while the apartment filled with the phantom aromas of holidays past. She could almost smell the sage and thyme she would have been stuffing into the turkey's cavity right now, could almost hear the gentle bubbling of cranberry sauce simmering on the stove. Instead, she was surrounded by the sterile silence of a life that had somehow shrunk to fit inside 4 beige walls. Her phone sat on the counter, completely silent. No calls asking for last-minute cooking advice. No texts requesting her grandmother's gravy recipe. No panicked messages about forgotten ingredients that Elena always kept in backup supply. The device that once buzzed constantly with family requests and updates now served as nothing more than a reminder of how thoroughly she had been erased from the day she had created for 3 decades. Around 2 o'clock, the exact time she would have been arriving at Jessica's perfectly orchestrated dinner, Elena opened her laptop and began scrolling through old videos stored in her digital photo library. The screen filled with Christmas mornings, birthday parties, and Thanksgiving celebrations stretching back 15 years. In every frame, she saw herself moving through the background like a ghost, stirring something at the stove, carrying platters to the table, wiping down surfaces, organizing coats, refilling drinks. She was in every video, but she was never the focus, never the one being celebrated or thanked or acknowledged. She was the woman behind the camera when family photos were taken, the one who said, "Let me take this one," so everyone else could be together in the frame. She was the orchestrator of joy, but never its recipient. One video from last Thanksgiving made her stomach clench with recognition. The camera had been set up on the mantel, capturing the entire dining room as the family sat around the table she had spent hours setting with her grandmother's china. Elena watched herself appear periodically in the frame, serving more stuffing, refilling water glasses, clearing empty plates, while the conversation continued without pause around her movements. In the video, Richard was telling a story about a difficult client, and everyone was laughing. Elena appeared at his elbow, quietly placing a fresh dinner roll on his plate, then disappeared back into the kitchen. He didn't pause his story, didn't acknowledge her presence, didn't even glance in her direction. She had become so invisible that her own family no longer registered her acts of service as worthy of basic recognition. But the moment that broke something fundamental inside her came near the end of the video. Marcus was describing his new apartment, and Gloria was expressing concern about whether he was eating properly. "You need to learn to cook for yourself, mijo," Gloria said with genuine worry. "You can't live on takeout forever." "Don't worry, Grandma," Marcus laughed. "I know where to come when I want a real home-cooked meal." He gestured vaguely around the table, his hands encompassing the perfectly prepared feast. But his eyes never found Elena, who was visible in the background washing dishes. This family knows how to cook. This family. As if the meal had materialized through collective effort rather than Elena's solitary labor of love. Elena closed the laptop and moved to her bathroom, where she sank to the cold tile floor and finally allowed herself to fall apart completely. She cried for the woman she used to be before she became invisible. She cried for 34 years of birthdays where she baked the cakes but never made the wishes. She cried for holidays where she created the magic but never experienced the wonder. Most of all, she cried for the devastating realization that she had confused being needed with being loved, and somewhere along the way, she had stopped being either. The sobs came in waves that left her gasping and exhausted, curled on the bathroom floor like a broken bird. Outside, the rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, and Elena understood with crushing clarity that she was completely, utterly alone in a life she had spent decades building for other people. When the tears finally stopped, she remained on the floor for a long time, staring at the ceiling and wondering if anyone would notice if she simply disappeared entirely. The thought wasn't dramatic or dangerous. It was practical, like wondering if anyone would miss a piece of furniture that had been moved to storage. That night, as families across the country shared gratitude around tables laden with tradition, Elena Martinez sat in her empty apartment and realized she couldn't remember the last time anyone had been genuinely grateful for her existence rather than just her usefulness. On the Saturday after Thanksgiving, Elena found herself moving through her apartment like a sleepwalker, mechanically straightening things that didn't need straightening, organizing spaces that were already organized. The silence had become a living thing, pressing against her eardrums and making her acutely aware of how small her world had become. She needed something, anything, to occupy her hands and quiet the endless loop of painful thoughts cycling through her mind. She decided to tackle the hall closet, a cramped space that had become a repository for boxes she'd been meaning to sort through for months. Most contained teaching supplies and old student artwork she couldn't bear to throw away, but wedged behind a box of classroom decorations, she found a manila folder she didn't immediately recognize. The folder was thick and slightly warped from age, held together with a rubber band that had lost most of its elasticity. Elena carried it to her kitchen table and opened it carefully, releasing the faint scent of aged paper and forgotten memories. Inside were dozens of cards, letters, and notes she had saved over the years, a collection she had completely forgotten about. The handwriting ranged from careful adult cursive to the oversized, uneven letters of young children. As she began reading, Elena felt something stirring inside her chest, a warmth she hadn't experienced in months. The first card was from Sarah Chen, a student from her second year of teaching. The construction paper had faded from bright yellow to pale cream, but the words were still clearly visible. Dear Ms. Martinez, thank you for helping me with my reading. My mom says I'm getting so much better because you never gave up on me. You make me feel smart. Love, Sarah. Elena remembered Sarah vividly, a quiet girl who had struggled with dyslexia and spent most of first grade convinced she was stupid. Elena had worked with her every day after school for months, using different techniques and refusing to accept that any child couldn't learn to love reading. By the end of second grade, Sarah was reading above grade level. The next letter was from David Rodriguez's mother, written in Spanish and dated 15 years ago. Senora Martinez, I cannot express how grateful our family is for your kindness to David during his father's illness. When David came home crying because the other children were teasing him about his second-hand clothes, you handled it with such grace. You didn't just stop the teasing. You made David proud of who he is. That is a gift we will never forget. Elena remembered that situation too. She had turned David's patched clothes into a lesson about creativity and resourcefulness, helping the whole class understand that someone's worth wasn't measured by their possessions. David had walked taller after that day. Card after card revealed a pattern Elena had lost sight of entirely. She had mattered to people. She had changed lives. She had been seen, valued, appreciated, not for what she could provide, but for who she was and how she made others feel. One letter made her hands tremble as she read it. It was from Jessica Mills, a student she'd taught during her 5th year, written when Jessica was in high school. Ms. Martinez, I'm writing to tell you something I never got to say. In 3rd grade, when my parents were getting divorced, I felt like my whole world was falling apart. I was angry and scared and didn't understand why everything was changing. You never asked me what was wrong, but somehow you knew I needed extra attention. You gave me special jobs to do, like cleaning the board and organizing books. You made me feel important when I felt like nothing. You saved me that year. I'm graduating next week, and I wanted you to know that when I become a teacher, I want to be exactly like you. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Elena stared at that last line until the words blurred through her tears. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. The irony was devastating and beautiful at the same time. For years, she had been the person who saw invisible children and made them feel valued. Yet she had somehow become invisible herself. At the bottom of the folder was a card that took her breath away entirely. It was from Marcus, written in his careful 8-year-old handwriting when she was student teaching at his elementary school. Dear Mom, you are the best teacher in the whole world. You make learning fun, and you never get mad when kids don't understand. I'm proud that you're my mom. Love, Marcus. Elena held the card against her chest and finally understood the magnitude of what she had lost. Not just her family's appreciation, but her own sense of worth and identity. She had been an exceptional teacher, a woman who changed lives and inspired children. She had been someone who mattered deeply to people who needed her most. Somewhere along the way, she had forgotten that the woman who could help a struggling child believe in themselves was the same woman who deserved to be believed in. Elena sat at her kitchen table until well past midnight, surrounded by the scattered evidence of a life that had mattered deeply to people beyond her family circle. The cards and letters created a mosaic of impact she had somehow forgotten existed, each piece revealing a version of herself that felt both familiar and foreign, like looking at photographs of someone you used to know intimately but had lost touch with over the years. As the hours passed, something fundamental began shifting inside her. The fog of self-doubt that had clouded her thinking for months started to lift, revealing uncomfortable truths she had been afraid to acknowledge. She reached for a notebook and began writing, not the careful lists and meal plans that had dominated her recent years, but raw, honest thoughts that poured out like water through a broken dam. When did I stop being Elena Martinez and become just Elena who does things for other people? She wrote. When did I start measuring my worth by how much I could sacrifice rather than how much I could contribute? She made a second list, this one more difficult to face. On one side of the page, she wrote everything she had been doing for her family over the past 5 years. Cooking, cleaning, organizing, caregiving, financial support, emotional labor, holiday planning, crisis management, transportation, shopping, and dozens of other services she provided without question or compensation. On the other side, she wrote what she received in return: occasional thanks, the assumption that she would always be available, criticism disguised as helpful suggestions, and the gradual erosion of her voice in family decisions. The math was devastating in its clarity. Elena calculated that she spent approximately 30 hours per week on family-related tasks: cooking, caring for Gloria, organizing events, running errands, and providing emotional support. 30 hours that she could have spent pursuing her own interests, advancing her career, or building relationships with people who valued her as more than a service provider. She thought about her teaching salary and realized she had been essentially working a second full-time job for free, while Jessica, who had no children at home and a much higher household income, was praised for contributing a store-bought cake or hiring a caterer, but the financial cost paled in comparison to the emotional expense. Elena opened her laptop and began researching something that had been gnawing at the edges of her consciousness for weeks. She typed, "signs of emotional neglect in families," and found herself reading articles that described her life with startling accuracy. Family members who provide emotional labor are often taken for granted to the point where their contributions become invisible, one article explained. Their needs are consistently placed last, their opinions are dismissed or overlooked, and their emotional well-being is considered less important than maintaining family harmony. Another article discussed how some family members become designated caretakers, people who are automatically expected to sacrifice their own needs for the benefit of others, often without recognition or reciprocal support. Elena recognized herself in every paragraph. The most painful revelation came when she read about parentification, the process by which a family member takes on responsibilities that should be shared among all adults. Elena realized she had been functioning as the family's unpaid manager, therapist, chef, and coordinator, while everyone else enjoyed the benefits of her labor without acknowledging the burden. She stayed up until 3 in the morning, reading and processing, and finally understanding that what had happened to her wasn't accidental or inevitable. It was the result of a family system that had slowly, systematically trained everyone, including Elena herself, to see her value only in terms of what she could provide for others. The next morning, Elena did something she hadn't done in years. She called in sick to her volunteer commitment at the church food pantry, not because she was physically ill, but because she was finally ready to prioritize her own healing. Instead of spending Saturday morning serving others, she would spend it determining what she wanted her life to look like. She made a pot of coffee, not the weak blend Gloria preferred, but the dark roast Elena actually enjoyed. and sat down to write what she mentally called her Declaration of Independence. "I am Elena Martinez," she wrote at the top of a fresh page. "I am an excellent teacher who has inspired countless children to believe in themselves. I am a woman with dreams, opinions, and needs that matter. I am valuable not because of what I can do for others, but because of who I am." For the first time in months, Elena felt a familiar spark, the same energy that had once driven her to help struggling students succeed, but now directed toward the most important student she had ever taught, herself. Elena's transformation began with small, almost invisible changes that even she didn't initially recognize as revolutionary acts of self-preservation. On Monday morning, she walked into Roosevelt Elementary School with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months, carrying herself differently as she moved through the familiar hallways lined with colorful student artwork. During her lunch break, instead of grading papers or planning family meals, Elena found herself in the principal's office having a conversation that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. "Mrs. Patterson," Elena said, settling into the chair across from Principal Patricia Patterson's desk, "I wanted to discuss the possibility of returning to full-time teaching in January." Mrs. Patterson's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Elena, that's wonderful news. We've missed having you here full-time. Your classroom management skills are exceptional, and the way you connect with struggling students is remarkable. Are you sure you're ready to take on the additional responsibilities?" Elena felt a warm surge of recognition, the feeling of being valued for her professional competence rather than her willingness to serve others. "I'm more than ready. I've realized I need to invest more energy in work that fulfills me intellectually and professionally." "I have to ask," Mrs. Patterson continued, "what about your family commitments? I know you've been caring for your mother and helping with family responsibilities. Will you be able to manage the increased workload?" Elena took a breath, feeling the weight of a decision that represented far more than a career change. "I'm learning to set boundaries that allow me to be present for my family without sacrificing my own professional growth. I believe both are possible." That afternoon, Elena called Dr. Rebecca Santos, a therapist whose name she'd found through her insurance company's directory. Making the appointment felt like admitting defeat and claiming victory simultaneously. "I'm calling because I think I've lost myself somewhere along the way," Elena explained during their first phone conversation. "I need help figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to make everyone else happy." Dr. Santos's voice was warm and professional. "That takes courage to recognize, Elena. Many people spend their entire lives without acknowledging that pattern. The fact that you're calling suggests you're already beginning to reclaim your sense of self." Elena's family began noticing changes, though they couldn't quite articulate what felt different. When Richard called Tuesday evening asking if she could drive Gloria to a doctor's appointment Thursday morning, Elena's response was polite but firm. "I'm not available Thursday morning, Richard. I have a commitment I can't reschedule." The commitment was her second therapy session, but Elena saw no need to justify her unavailability with details that would invite negotiation or guilt. "But Elena," Richard's voice carried a note of confusion, "Mom specifically requested that you take her. She gets anxious with new doctors." "I understand that, and I'm sorry I can't help this time. Perhaps Jessica could accompany her, or you could take time off work. I'm sure Mom will be fine with either of you there for support." Elena hung up before Richard could respond, her heart pounding, not with anxiety, but with a strange sense of liberation. She had said no without apologizing, explaining, or offering alternatives that would inconvenience her further. The following week, Jessica called about Christmas planning, automatically assuming Elena would coordinate the menu and handle the cooking. Elena's response was carefully neutral. "I haven't made any Christmas plans yet, Jessica. I'm still deciding how I want to spend the holiday this year." "What do you mean, deciding?" Jessica's voice carried that familiar edge of someone whose expectations were being challenged. "Christmas is family time. We always have dinner at the house." "You do," Elena replied evenly. "I'm considering other options this year." She wasn't bluffing or playing games. Elena genuinely was considering other options. Her colleague, Sarah Martinez, no relation despite the shared surname, had mentioned that several teachers from school were planning a Christmas Eve dinner for colleagues who lived far from family or preferred alternative celebrations. "It's actually quite lovely," Sarah had explained during a break room conversation. "Last year we had 12 people, all bringing dishes they actually wanted to eat, rather than obligatory traditional foods. We played board games, shared stories about our most memorable teaching moments, and generally enjoyed each other's company without any family drama or expectations." The idea of spending Christmas with people who valued her presence rather than her service felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Elena also began making other changes that felt subtle but significant. She stopped checking her phone constantly for family messages that demanded immediate responses. She started buying groceries based on her own preferences rather than everyone else's requests. She purchased a book she'd wanted to read for months instead of spending that money on ingredients for yet another family dinner she wouldn't enjoy. Most importantly, Elena began rediscovering friendships she had neglected during her years of family-focused living, reaching out to colleagues and former students' parents who had always appreciated her company but had been pushed to the margins of her overscheduled life. Retry. The absence of Elena's constant availability created ripples through her family's carefully structured routine, like removing a crucial weight from a delicately balanced mobile. What had once functioned smoothly with Elena's invisible orchestration began requiring conscious effort and coordination from people who had forgotten how to manage their own needs. The first crack appeared during Gloria's routine cardiologist appointment in early December. Richard had assumed Elena would handle the transportation and paperwork as she had for 5 years, despite her clear statement that she wasn't available. When Elena didn't call to confirm details or send reminder texts, Richard suddenly realized he didn't know the doctor's name, office location, or appointment time. "Elena," he called Thursday morning, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, "where is Mom's appointment today? I've been looking through her papers, but I can't find the information." Elena was reviewing lesson plans in the teacher's lounge when her phone rang. 6 months ago, she would have dropped everything to solve this crisis, apologizing for not anticipating his confusion. Now, she finished writing her notes before returning the call. "The appointment information is in the red folder on Mom's nightstand," she said calmly. "Dr. Ramirez's office on 5th Street. The appointment was at 10:30. "Was?" Richard's voice cracked slightly. "Elena, it's already 11:15. "Then you'll need to call and reschedule," Elena replied, her tone remaining steady and helpful without becoming apologetic or panicked. "Dr. Ramirez's staff is usually quite understanding about emergencies." After hanging up, Elena felt a strange mixture of guilt and empowerment. Her mother had missed an important appointment because Elena hadn't managed everyone else's responsibilities. But she also recognized that this was a natural consequence of her family's assumption that she would always handle details they couldn't be bothered to track themselves. The second sign of shifting power dynamics emerged around holiday planning. Jessica called Elena repeatedly during the first week of December, each conversation revealing increasing frustration with Elena's continued vagueness about Christmas dinner. "Elena, I need to know how many people to plan for," Jessica said during their third conversation, her voice carrying the sharp edge of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "Are you coming to dinner or not?" "I'm still considering my options," Elena repeated, recognizing that her uncertainty was creating exactly the kind of logistical stress she had always absorbed for everyone else's convenience. "What options?" Jessica's laugh had a brittle quality. "It's Christmas, Elena. Family comes first. You can't just decide not to participate in Christmas." Elena found herself smiling at Jessica's assumption that Christmas required her participation rather than her labor. "I can absolutely decide how to spend my Christmas, Jessica, just as you decided how to spend Thanksgiving." The comparison hung in the air between them, unspoken but clearly understood. By mid-December, the family's requests for Elena's services became more frequent and more desperate. Marcus called asking for her meatloaf recipe because "nobody makes it like you do, Mom." When Elena suggested he could learn to cook it himself, Marcus laughed nervously. "But you've always made it for us. Can't you just make a batch and bring it over? I'm not catering meals for individual requests anymore, sweetheart, Elena said gently. But I'd be happy to teach you the recipe if you'd like to learn. Marcus's silence suggested this wasn't the response he'd expected or wanted. The most revealing moment came when Gloria called Elena directly, bypassing Richard and Jessica entirely. Mija, Gloria's voice was plaintive and confused. Nobody tells me what's happening anymore. Richard and Jessica are always whispering about schedules and doctors, but they don't explain anything to me. I feel like a burden in my own family. Elena's heart ached hearing the bewilderment in her mother's voice, but she also recognized an opportunity to address the real issue. Mom, you're not a burden. But the family has gotten used to me handling all the communication and coordination. Maybe it's time for everyone to start talking directly to each other instead of expecting me to be the translator and organizer for everything. But you're so good at that, Elena. You always know what everyone needs. I learned those skills because I had to, Mom. Richard and Jessica are perfectly capable of learning them too. They just haven't needed to as long as I was doing everything for them. For the first time, Elena heard her mother consider the possibility that other family members could step up and take responsibility for their own relationships and needs. The power shift was subtle but unmistakable. Elena was no longer the family's crisis manager, emotional translator, or automatic solution provider, and surprisingly, the world hadn't ended when she stepped back from those roles. The confrontation Elena had been unconsciously preparing for arrived on December 18th, disguised as a casual phone call that would permanently alter the dynamics of her family relationships. Richard's voice carried the forced casualness of someone trying to avoid acknowledging a problem while simultaneously demanding its resolution. "Hey, Elena," he began, his tone artificially light. "Jessica and I were finalizing Christmas dinner plans, and we figured we should probably talk logistics. What time works best for you to get started on the cooking?" Elena paused her grating and set down her red pen, recognizing this moment as the crossroads she had been approaching for weeks. The assumption embedded in Richard's question was breathtaking in its audacity. Not whether she would cook, but simply when she would begin the labor they had already assigned to her, without consultation. "I won't be cooking Christmas dinner this year, Richard." The silence that followed stretched long enough for Elena to hear the clock ticking in her apartment and the distant sound of children playing in the courtyard outside her window. "What do you mean you won't be cooking?" Richard's voice had shifted from casual to bewildered. "Elena, it's Christmas dinner. It's tradition." "It's tradition for me to cook while everyone else enjoys the meal," Elena replied, her voice steady and clear. "I've decided not to continue that tradition." "But Elena, be reasonable. You're the best cook in the family. Nobody else can make the dishes Mom loves. What about your famous stuffing? The crown roast you always do? Mom will be so disappointed if we don't have those things." Elena felt the familiar tug of guilt, the well-trained impulse to prioritize everyone else's happiness over her own well-being. But 6 weeks of therapy and careful self-reflection had strengthened her resolve. "If those dishes are important to the family, someone else can learn to make them. I'm happy to share the recipes." "Elena, what's gotten into you?" Richard's confusion was giving way to frustration. "This isn't like you at all. You love cooking for the family. You've always said it brings you joy." The accusation stung because it contained just enough truth to make Elena doubt herself momentarily. She had loved cooking for her family. In the beginning, when her efforts were appreciated and acknowledged, when she felt valued rather than exploited. "I used to love it," Elena said carefully. "When it felt like a gift I was choosing to give, rather than a service everyone expected and took for granted." "Expected?" Richard's voice was rising. "Elena, nobody expects you to cook. We just thought, you enjoy it. You're good at it. It's what you do." "It's what I do," Elena repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "Not who I am, what I do. Like a job, except I don't get paid, I don't get time off, and I don't get thanked unless the results meet everyone else's standards. That's not fair, Elena. We appreciate everything you do. You know we're grateful." When was the last time anyone in this family asked what I wanted for Christmas dinner instead of assuming I'd make what everyone else preferred? Elena asked. When was the last time someone offered to cook so I could enjoy the holiday as a guest? Richard's silence was answer enough. I've made other plans for Christmas, Richard. Other plans? His voice cracked with disbelief. What kind of other plans? Elena, this is family. This is Christmas. You can't just abandon Christmas. Elena felt something crystallize inside her chest. Not anger, but clarity. I'm not abandoning Christmas. I'm choosing to spend it with people who want me there for who I am, not for what I can provide them. Where could you possibly go that's more important than family? Several colleagues from school are having dinner together. Teachers who live far from family or who prefer celebrating without family obligations and expectations. People who invited me because they enjoy my company, not because they need me to work. The distinction was subtle but crucial, and Elena could tell from Richard's continued silence that he was beginning to understand the implications of what she was saying. Elena, this is ridiculous. You're being dramatic. We need you here. Mom needs you here. You can't just decide not to be part of Christmas. I can absolutely decide how to spend my Christmas, Elena said, her voice gaining strength with each word. Just like Jessica decided how to spend Thanksgiving. Just like you all decided to move Mom's birthday party without consulting me. I'm simply extending the same courtesy, making plans that work for me without requiring anyone else's approval or participation. But Elena, we're family. Family comes first. You've always said that. Family should come first, Elena agreed. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being treated like family and started being treated like hired help. The difference is that family members' needs and preferences matter. Hired help is expected to accommodate everyone else's needs while ignoring their own. Richard was quiet for a long moment, and Elena could practically hear him processing this perspective he had never been forced to consider. Elena, I think you're overreacting. Maybe you should talk to someone about this. You don't sound like yourself. Elena smiled, recognizing the irony in his observation. You're absolutely right, Richard. I don't sound like the version of myself that you're used to. The version who said yes to everything, apologized for having needs, and prioritized everyone else's comfort over my own well-being. I am talking to someone about it, a therapist who's helping me remember that my needs matter too. Christmas Eve arrived with an unexpected phone call that would transform Elena's quiet declaration of independence into something far more dramatic than she had ever anticipated. She was preparing to leave for Sarah's house, carefully wrapping a homemade Trelleches cake, the first dessert she had made for pure joy in months, when her phone buzzed with Marcus's name on the screen. Mom! His voice was tight with barely controlled panic. I need you to come over. Right now. Please. Elena's trained maternal instincts kicked in, despite her recent boundary setting. What's wrong, sweetheart? Are you hurt? I'm fine, but everything else is completely falling apart. Jessica's dinner is a disaster. Grandma is upset and crying. Uncle Richard is having some kind of meltdown, and I don't know what to do. Elena felt the familiar pull to drop everything and rescue her family from their crisis. But something Dr. Santos had said during their last session echoed in her mind. Sometimes people need to experience the natural consequences of taking others for granted before they can truly appreciate what they've lost. Marcus, I'm sorry you're dealing with a stressful situation, but I have plans tonight that I can't change. Mom, you don't understand. The catering company Jessica hired canceled this morning because of a kitchen fire. She tried to cook the dinner herself, but she burned the turkey and the side dishes are inedible. Grandma keeps asking where you are and why Christmas doesn't feel like Christmas. Uncle Richard is arguing with Jessica about whose fault this is, and I think Grandma is having chest pains from the stress. Elena's heart clenched at the mention of her mother's health, but she forced herself to remain calm. If Mom is having chest pains, you need to call 911 immediately, Marcus. That's not something to handle through a phone call. She's not having a heart attack, Marcus said quickly. But she's really upset. She keeps saying this isn't how Christmas is supposed to be, and she's asking for you specifically. She won't listen to anyone else. Elena closed her eyes, recognizing the manipulation embedded in Marcus's plea. Her mother's distress was real, but the expectation that Elena should abandon her own plans to solve a crisis created by other people's poor planning was the same dynamic that had controlled her life for decades. Marcus, I love you and I love Grandma, but the situation you're describing isn't an emergency that requires me to abandon my commitments. It's the natural result of a family expecting one person to handle all the planning and preparation while taking no responsibility themselves. But Mom, we need you. We don't know how to fix this. And that, Elena said gently, is exactly the problem. A family of capable adults shouldn't be helpless when one person isn't available to solve their problems. She was about to hang up when Marcus said something that stopped her cold. Mom, wait, there's something else. I found something in Uncle Richard's office that I think you need to know about. Elena's grip tightened on the phone. What kind of something? Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. Financial documents about Grandma's house and Dad's life insurance money. I think Uncle Richard has been using Grandma's money for his business, and Jessica knows about it. They've been talking about selling the house because they say Grandma can't afford the upkeep, but the papers I saw suggest they've been the ones draining her accounts. Elena felt the floor shift beneath her feet. Her father's life insurance policy had been substantial, and Gloria owned the family home outright. If Richard had been mismanaging their mother's finances while positioning Elena as the primary caregiver to avoid scrutiny, it would explain many things that had never made sense. Marcus, where exactly did you find these documents? In the desk drawer when I was looking for aspirin for Grandma's headache. Uncle Richard left his office unlocked, and the papers were just sitting there. Mom, there are bank statements showing transfers from Grandma's accounts to Uncle Richard's business account. Thousands of dollars over the past 2 years. Elena's mind raced, connecting dots she had been too trusting to see before. Richard's insistence that Gloria needed care, Elena could provide for free. Jessica's expensive lifestyle despite Richard's claims about business struggles. The family's increasing dependence on Elena's unpaid labor while they controlled Gloria's financial resources. Marcus, I want you to take photos of those documents with your phone and send them to me immediately. Don't let anyone know what you found, and put everything back exactly where you found it. Mom, are you coming over? Elena looked at her reflection in the hallway mirror, seeing a woman who had been systematically exploited by people she had trusted implicitly. The betrayal was devastating, but it was also clarifying in a way that felt almost liberating. No, Marcus, I'm not coming over. But I am going to make some phone calls tomorrow that are going to change everything. Your Uncle Richard and Jessica have been managing Grandma's finances while expecting me to provide free caregiving services. If they want to be in control of her money, they can take full responsibility for her care. Elena hung up and immediately called her attorney's office, leaving a voicemail requesting an emergency consultation about potential financial elder abuse. Then she called Adult Protective Services and reported her concerns about her mother's financial situation. The justice Elena had never sought was about to arrive, whether her family was ready for it or not. Elena stood on the familiar brick walkway of her childhood home exactly 6 hours after Marcus's panicked phone call, but this time she wasn't carrying offerings or apologies. Instead, she held her phone, displaying the photos Marcus had sent, bank statements, and business documents that painted a devastating picture of financial manipulation spanning 2 years. The house that had once represented warmth and family unity now felt like a crime scene where trust had been systematically murdered. Elena could see the chaos through the dining room window, Jessica frantically trying to salvage what appeared to be a charred turkey carcass while Richard paced the kitchen with his phone pressed to his ear, probably calling restaurants desperate enough to deliver on Christmas Eve. She knocked 3 times, the same gentle raps that had been met with such shocking coldness just weeks earlier. This time, when Richard opened the door, his face went through a complex series of expressions: relief, guilt, desperation, and finally, something that looked like fear when he noticed Elena's composed expression and the absence of any rescue supplies. "Elena, thank God you're here," he began, his voice carrying the manic energy of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing. I know you said you had other plans, but we really need— I'm not here to cook dinner, Richard, Elena interrupted quietly. I'm here to collect some of my belongings and to have a conversation with Mom about her finances. The color drained from Richard's face with startling speed. Behind him, Jessica appeared in the doorway, her carefully styled hair disheveled and her expensive dress stained with what looked like cranberry sauce and grease. The kitchen beyond them looked like a battlefield where Christmas dinner had gone to die. Elena, Jessica's voice was bright with false relief. Perfect timing. We've had some unexpected challenges today, and we could really use your expertise in the kitchen. Maybe you could help us salvage— Where's Mom? Elena asked, stepping past both of them into the house with a confidence that seemed to surprise everyone, including herself. She found Gloria sitting in her favorite armchair in the living room, looking small and confused amid the chaos. Her mother's face lit up when she saw Elena, and for a moment, Elena felt her resolve waver at the genuine joy in her mother's eyes. "Mija, you came," Gloria said, reaching for Elena's hands. "This Christmas feels so wrong without you. Nothing tastes right. Nothing feels right. I keep telling them this isn't how we do Christmas, but nobody listens to me anymore." Elena knelt beside her mother's chair, taking Gloria's hands in hers and speaking in the gentle voice she reserved for her most fragile students. "Mom, I need to ask you some important questions about your money, about the accounts Dad left you and the house finances." Gloria's expression shifted from joy to confusion. "My money? I don't know anything about money, Mija. Richard handles all that now. He says it's too complicated for me to understand." "When did you last see your bank statements, Mom? Do you know how much money you have in your accounts?" "Richard says I don't need to worry about those things. He takes care of everything so I can just focus on staying healthy." Gloria's voice carried the uncertain quality of someone repeating explanations she didn't fully understand or believe. Elena felt a cold rage building in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "Mom, Dad left you that life insurance money so you would always be secure and independent. You should know exactly how much you have and where it's being spent." From the kitchen doorway, she could hear Richard and Jessica having a heated, whispered conversation punctuated by words like lawyer and investigation and how much does she know? Marcus appeared from upstairs, his face pale with guilt and worry. He approached Elena cautiously, as if she were a bomb that might explode if handled incorrectly. "Mom, I'm sorry I called you. I know you said you had other plans, but everything was falling apart and I panicked. I shouldn't have expected you to fix everything." He paused, glancing toward the kitchen where his aunt and uncle were still whispering frantically. "After I sent you those photos, I started thinking about how weird it's been that Uncle Richard always changes the subject when Grandma asks about money, and how he's been saying she can't afford things that she should definitely be able to afford." Elena stood and faced her son directly. "Marcus, I'm proud of you for paying attention and for trusting me with what you discovered. That took courage. Does this mean you're coming back? Are you going to help us fix Christmas dinner?" Elena looked around the living room where she had spent countless hours organizing family celebrations, mediating conflicts, and providing emotional labor that had never been acknowledged or appreciated. She thought about Sarah's warm kitchen, where people were probably laughing over stories and truly enjoying each other's company. "No, sweetheart, I'm not here to fix Christmas dinner. I'm here because your uncle and aunt have some serious questions to answer about how they've been managing Grandma's money while expecting me to provide free caregiving. That's not about Christmas dinner. That's about something much more important." Marcus nodded slowly, and Elena could see him beginning to understand that his mother's transformation wasn't a temporary mood change or holiday drama. It was a fundamental shift in how she saw herself and how she intended to be treated. "When you're ready to have a real conversation about how this family treats each other," Elena said gently. "Not just about what I can do for all of you. I'll be here. But I'm done being the person who fixes everyone else's problems while my own needs are ignored." 6 months later, Elena sat in her new apartment's sunny breakfast nook, grading her students' creative writing assignments, while classical music played softly in the background. The space was smaller than the family house where she had spent so many years orchestrating other people's lives, but every corner reflected her own choices and preferences. Soft lavender walls replaced the beige neutrality she had lived with for decades. Bookshelves lined with teaching resources and novels she actually wanted to read had replaced the storage systems for other people's belongings. Through her kitchen window, she could see the community garden where she had started volunteering on Saturday mornings, teaching neighborhood children how to grow vegetables and flowers. It was work that fed her soul in ways that cooking endless family dinners never had. These children were genuinely excited to learn from her, and their parents expressed gratitude that felt authentic rather than obligatory. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "Mom, can we have lunch this weekend? I'd like to talk." Elena smiled as she typed back, "I'd love that. Saturday at 1 p.m.? There's a new cafe near my apartment that I think you'd enjoy." The relationship with her son had been slowly healing over the past 6 months, built on a foundation of honesty rather than expectation. Marcus had been the first family member to truly understand what had happened, especially after the investigation into Gloria's finances revealed the extent of Richard's financial manipulation. The Adult Protective Services case had resulted in Gloria's money being placed in a monitored trust, with Marcus serving as an additional oversight guardian alongside a court-appointed advocate. Richard and Jessica's marriage hadn't survived the legal scrutiny and public embarrassment. Elena felt no satisfaction in their separation, only a quiet sadness for the destruction that greed and entitlement had caused. Jessica had moved back to her parents' house across town, while Richard now lived in a small rental apartment and worked for someone else's construction company after being forced to sell his business to repay the money he had misappropriated from his mother's accounts. Elena's relationship with her mother had become something neither of them had expected, more honest and more equal. Gloria now lived in a senior living community that she genuinely enjoyed, funded appropriately by her own resources, and chosen through careful research rather than crisis management. Elena visited twice a week, and they spent time together as mother and daughter rather than caregiver and patient. "I never realized how much pressure I was putting on you, mija," Gloria had said during one of their recent visits. "I thought I was being taken care of, but really, I was just letting Richard and Jessica make me helpless so you would have to do all the work. That wasn't fair to any of us." Elena's teaching career had flourished in ways she hadn't imagined possible. With the emotional energy she had once spent managing family crises now channeled into her professional development. She had been promoted to lead teacher and was developing a district-wide program for supporting struggling readers. Her colleagues valued her insights and leadership, and Elena had rediscovered the deep satisfaction of work that mattered. The most surprising development had been her friendship with Dr. Santos, her therapist, who had helped Elena understand that healing wasn't about becoming someone new, but about returning to who she had always been underneath the layers of obligation and self-sacrifice. Their professional relationship had evolved into occasional coffee meetings where they discussed books, teaching strategies, and Elena's ongoing journey toward authentic self-care. Elena's social life had expanded to include people who appreciated her company rather than her services. She regularly attended dinner parties with colleagues, joined a book club at the local library, and had even started taking salsa dancing lessons, something she had wanted to try for 20 years but had never had time for when her evenings belonged to everyone else's needs. The most profound change was internal. Elena had learned to recognize the difference between being needed and being valued, between providing service and receiving respect. She still helped people, but now she chose when, how, and for whom she offered assistance. Her generosity had boundaries, and those boundaries had paradoxically made her more effective at helping others rather than less. On this particular Saturday morning, as Elena reviewed her students' stories about their dreams for the future, she realized that for the first time in decades, she was genuinely excited about her own future rather than just managing everyone else's present needs. Elena Martinez had finally learned that the most important lesson she could teach to her students, her family, and herself was that every person's worth existed independent of their usefulness to others. She was no longer invisible in her own life, and she had no intention of disappearing again.